reflected brilliantly, succinctly, bluntly, as always, in my colleague Dick Posner's eloquent formulation, where he writes, "The major function of criminal law in a capitalist society is to prevent people from bypassing the system of voluntary compensated exchange, the market, explicit or implicit, in situations where, because transaction costs are low, the market is the more efficient method of allocating resources than forced exchange. Attempts to bypass the market will be discouraged by a legal system bent on promoting efficiency." In this passage, the idea of market efficiency leads to a penal theory where the only legitimate space for the government to intervene is in punishment. Elsewhere, it must leave alone voluntary compensating exchanges as if the space of the market existed somehow independently of the policing, as if the two domains were distinct. What liberalism did, and what neoliberalism has continued to do, is to sever these two spaces, the economic and the punishment spaces, right? And to push the punishment space outside of the economic domain, right, where there is natural order, right, and to allow it then to grow exponentially. Now, what's so fascinating, though, is that these ideas, this notion of neoliberal penality, was actually embedded in physiocratic thought. You can actually trace it to the political theory that the physiocrats developed once they had developed and once they had kind of passed the notion of natural orderliness in economics. So their thought and the idea of natural orderliness gradually emerged into a political theory that they called legal despotism. And they embraced this notion of legal despotism, particularly François Quesnay and Mercier de la Rivière. And it was a political ideal of complete governmental inactivity in all but the penal sphere. Given the existence of natural laws governing commerce, the economists envisaged no role for the legislature except to criminalize and punish severely those who deviate from the natural order. Now, this was presented by Quesnay in his essay, Despotisme de la Chine, in 1767, presented by Mercier de la Rivière in his famous book, L'ordre essentiel et naturel. And basically, the reasoning proceeded in a syllogistic manner, a five-point syllogistic manner. The first, of course, is that in the economic realm itself is governed by natural law. Right? Agriculture, commerce are governed by fundamental natural laws that inherently promote the best interests of mankind. That was the fundamental assumption, the beginning place of their theories. Now, that being the case, positive man-made laws could at best mimic natural law. In the economic domain, positive law usually would deviate somewhat from natural law, producing disorder rather than order, right? So if the space is governed by natural law, we wouldn't want to have it governed by positive law, because all that positive law could do would be, in fact, to create disorder, right? Therefore, positive law shouldn't extend to the domain of natural laws, or as Quesnay stated, positive legislation should therefore not reach the domain of physical laws. It's precisely for this reason, actually, that the physiocrats saw no need for a separate legislature. All lawmaking power should be centralized in a unified executive. This may be one of the early unified executive theories, a legal despot. But of course, despotism was a favorable term here, right? Who learns and directly implements the laws of nature. Now, according to Quesnay, there are, however, some men whose passions are out of order, whose passions, he writes, are déréglés. Right? These are men who fail to appreciate and follow the fundamental laws of nature, who just don't see the natural order, and who don't behave in conformity with the natural order. And it's for these men that we need positive law. The only legitimate object of positive man-made laws for Quesnay was to severely punish those men whose passions are out of order, in order to protect society from thieves and derelicts, from what he called les voleurs et les méchants. Now notice that the notion of natural order here does all the work, right? It leads inexorably to a penal sphere that is on the one hand marginalized, but on the other hand unleashed and allowed to expand without any limitations. And so what I would want to emphasize in the few minutes that I have with you is that the very logic of neoliberal penality was in some sense born with the initial insight of natural order, that the excess was embedded in the very logic or the rationality. It played out this phenomenon, right, the idea of what we see today, right, what we see today, the idea of natural market efficiency governing economic transactions, but surrounded by a huge penal sphere, right? The United States incarcerates 1% of its population. 1 out of 100 of us are in prisons or jails in this country. Right? A penal sphere that has been allowed to just expand because that's the only place the government can act. Some of you may have seen the New York Times article this past Tuesday under the header, "Prison Spending Outpaces All But Medicaid." According to a report from the Pew Center on States, 1 in every 31 adults, or 7.3 million Americans, are in prison on parole and probation at a cost to the states of $47 billion in 2008. Now, granted, $47 billion doesn't sound like much today, but that's a lot of money, right? Criminal correction spending has outpaced budget growth in education, transportation, and public assistance. The numbers are staggering, right? And what we see is a huge prison and jail population and high rates of supervision. Now, how is this made possible? What I contend is that it was made possible by this notion of neoliberal penality, by the idea of, on the one hand, natural orderliness in the economic sphere that then pushes us and pushes government into the punishment sphere. Now, a genealogy of neoliberal penality, of which this is, of course, just a thumbnail sketch beginning, would seek to explore how this mode of rationality became true, how it became accepted, how it became right and natural, how this conception of the penal sphere as the outer limit of the free market, as the unique location where government intervention is automatically legitimate, was naturalized. The goal is to trace how this dominant form of rationality became believable, how it became so obvious, and at what price. Let me stop there.